Welcome to the Page One Podcast, a podcast featuring a variety of guests and thought leaders on topics ranging from digital marketing, sales channel strategies, influencer marketing, best-in-class product launches, and all the details about how to accelerate sales. Now, here's your host, Luke Peters.
Thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Peters, CEO of Newer Appliances and retail brand digital strategy agency. In the studio episode, you're going to learn from Bill Endres on how, after 22 years at the executive level, he left and started his own business, Select Brands. And he now has developed private label and licensed products selling to some of the largest mass retailers in the world. And along with that, has a family business with his two sons working with him. This episode is sponsored by Retail Band. Business owners, do you wish you had someone to create a custom strategic plan to grow your online sales? Do you need someone to run your strategy on digital, social, influencers, and content? Learn more at retailband.com. So back to Bill. Bill graduated from Southwest Missouri State with a marketing degree, went to work for Corning Glass. After 5 years, he's moved over to Rival Manufacturing in Kansas City. He moved up to Senior VP of Sales and Marketing and was on the board of directors when, after 22 years, he decided to start his own business, Select Brands, and he has continued that for 22 more years. Bill is currently on the IHA board of directors and will become chairman of the board in September. He's blessed to also have both of his two sons in the business. Thanks, Bill, for joining us on the Page One Podcast.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Hey, Bill, before we get going, can you kind of give the audience a little bit of detail about the products? Maybe describe the types of products you sell. A couple of examples would be great.
Yeah, we are in the small electrical appliance business. We sell virtually anything that you find in the kitchen that plugs in and is used as an appliance to prepare food and get ready and heat food and cook food. Some of our brands are Toastmaster is one of our highest recognized brands, but we also make products that come under specialty baking, like in our baby cakes brand. We have True products, which are more of an upscale type of a product. Kitchen Selecties is our basic brand that's sold virtually everywhere. And then we do licensed brands and private label brands as well. Particularly in the licensed business, we do things like with Disney and Nickelodeon and Universal Studios, Warner Brothers. So yeah, that's kind of the breadth of the brand. And mostly everything that's in the kitchen, we usually have a source or we end up making products like that.
Yeah, that's great. So so for the audience, we're going to dive into a few of those things. We'll touch on licensing and how to think about that and what to think about in those licensing contracts. And Bill obviously has a lot of experience there. We'll talk about, private labeling versus licensing, even get into supply chain and some of the large customers as well that Bill and Select Brands are working with. So why don't we, first, speaking of coronavirus or talking about coronavirus, since it's on everybody's mind, how are you guys navigating that current challenge right now?
Well, it was definitely something that impacted sales. And if you would have asked me at the beginning, I thought it was going to be devastating to us as a importer and manufacture overseas and supply a product here in the U.S. with the retail business really kind of shutting down. In the first 2 months, I thought it was going to be a disaster. But shortly after that, we started to get our hands around it and figured out that, wow, the internet and the e-commerce business has really taken off here. And then those retailers who were still in operation started to see an increased demand. So it's definitely impacted us from sales-wise, but now it looks like it's going to make up the difference, and we're actually going to end up with a positive year.
Yeah, and for your category, people are cooking more at home, and so a lot of you guys probably are positioned pretty well when you think about it, or at least from my standpoint, it seems like you'd be positioned well for the current consumer trends.
Yeah, usually it's interesting in small appliance business because we're not a really high-end product, and there's utility value in what we sell. Usually when there's recessionary periods or times that are a little bit more difficult, our products are not impacted as deeply as some of the others, and they also end up coming kind of out of that recession period faster than others. And I think as long as we can keep the cost structure where it is and we have utility value in the product, the consumers recognize that and they tend to use it. And during coronavirus, people actually stayed home more, so they wanted products to help in food preparation and creating dinners at home.
Yeah, it's been a big trend, and nobody knows how long this is going to go on for, but I don't know, do you have any personal opinions, or what do you feel might happen in the future, with business, given all the health changes and impacts that's had to, say in-store business and just kind of change in consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think we made changes here at our business and how we operate, and those things still go on, and they'll probably continue to go on even after this starts to subside. But, we're a lot more conscious of our space and social distancing. Every day when people come in here, we still take temperatures and make sure people are safe. If they aren't, they have to go home, and then they have to get approval from the doctor to come back in. So we take it serious here. For about 6 to 8 weeks, we actually worked at home, and we actually closed the office except for the warehouse. And the warehouse that was shipping product, especially for .com, all those people were masked daily. They had to clean their workstations daily, temperatures taken daily. And we were very cognizant of the virus itself and made sure that nobody was impacted. Long term, when I think about the changes here, yes, I think there's health changes, and I think those will be impacted. But like most things go, and when coronavirus finally subsides, I think there'll be a loosening up of some of that. And I think history has proven that it's happened with other major pandemics. I do think that it's pointed out, though, the tenuous situation that we might face with having everything imported and the country being China. I think that there's a lot more pressure on China now, and we obviously have looked other places also for sourcing our product. So I do think that's given us a new kind of a direction to be able to be cognizant of, so we don't find ourselves in a tenuous position.
Yeah, I was going to ask that later on about your supply chain. Are you able to share, where you found success outside of China? Any examples, or even, if you're able to say, hey, we moved this percentage, it would be really great, I think, for the audience to kind of understand that. I know, that's been the trend with tariffs. Everybody's looking everywhere.
Yes.
But it is harder in your category. I mean, you guys got a plug. I understand the complexity of trying to move your products. There often isn't the, easy availability just to go to Vietnam or somewhere else. Maybe Taiwan, of course, price is going to be higher, but I'm curious where you guys have found success and how that's impacted your future planning.
That's a really good question. If you look at, it's really difficult in small appliances because you're not just making a product that is I won't say simple from the standpoint, I'm not in this, the cut and sew business, or you're not in something that's just only an injection molded product. We have multiple components that come from a lot of secondary supply. And when you don't have that supply chain in the country you're looking at, it becomes much more difficult. Today, we're having good luck in Indonesia has been the first place that we've been able to go. With Indonesia, we've been successful with 2 different manufacturers. We started off, and one is currently producing product for us, and the other is coming online late this year. So that'll be a good resource for us in 2 different product categories. Both of those factories have ties back to China. So they can give you some components if necessary. And they also have a good understanding of operational procedures in both places. In addition to that, we've looked at Vietnam and also Thailand. Our product being a little bit unique and being electrical, it's more difficult to find component suppliers in those countries. So we have to be cognizant of that. And it takes a little while to develop a good supplier in those countries.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And like you said, it's difficult because the supply chain still is going to go back to China for the components. All of those countries that you mentioned, I think everybody's looking at. Thailand for sure has some capabilities. India's up and coming. Mexico, of course, has some capabilities. You mentioned Vietnam, but in Indonesia, is it still a contract manufacturing situation, or are you having to really, own a lot more of, say, the R&D and the tooling, or is that already part of your business model where you guys are owning more of that?
That is part of our model. We own tools specific to our product. We do listings ourselves. We do design development. And that's one of the things that we decided early on, is that we needed to be able to do that to get the kind of product we wanted.
Yeah. I mean, so you're really differentiating yourself. Why don't we, I think the audience, before we jump into more questions here, and I was actually going to start with how you even started this business. We'll back up and get into that. I think I jumped down this rabbit hole because, that was, I was going to go into this later in the podcast anyways, but why don't we talk about your business? Are you able to share, how many team members you have, how big your warehouse is, just to give the audience a scale of the size of the business?
Sure. We do, let's just say we do about $100 million US in turnover. Mm-hmm. Some years more, some years a little less. And we do that with We try to keep our head count down. We have 31 people here in the U.S. We have a warehouse here, but most of our business is direct import. We have a team of 5 direct employees living in China, in mainland China. We have an office in Hong Kong, and we have contracted our own inspection and logistics network over there as well through our office in Hong Kong. So we do keep the numbers down for the volume that we do. As I said, we do a lot of direct import. So the percentage that goes through our warehouse here is only about 25% of our business. So that's one of the things that we do to make us a little bit different than other people.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, listen, a lot of companies would be jealous to have $3 million in revenue per person here in the U.S. So you guys are, above that. And so that's a great metric to hit. And I know it's going to vary for, industry to industry, but still, that's an impressive number. And then just to kind of reiterate there, because I know the audience is going to want to rewind that. So about, 100 million top line, 31 staff here, 5 staff in China, mostly DI business, 75% mostly DI. You have a Hong Kong office. Talk about, so obviously you're probably doing, sales, marketing, warehousing here, accounting, I'm guessing. So where are you guys doing, R&D? Is that with the 5 China staff, or are they doing mostly sourcing for you?
No, we have both. We have some engineering there and some development, but most of our product development and ideas generation and engineering starts here in the U.S. We have engineering capabilities, design capabilities. Obviously, we do a lot of marketing work and study ourselves, but we do a cooperative effort with our teams. Once we decide the project that we're going to work on, then we bring in our China team, and we also utilize some of the engineering capabilities that are with some of the factories we have. That's one of the things that we do when we vet a factory, is to make sure they have capable engineering staff in the factory as well.
Wow, that's great. And then have you guys been working on this move to Indonesia for a while, and now you're finally kind of live there? How long did it take to actually, listen, I know how difficult it is. You got a new country, a whole new factory. There's QC that's got to happen.
That's
maybe
correct.
Tooling. I mean, there's so much. Like, what was start to finish timeline there?
It really, because this factory existed and they were already producing some product, it made it easier for us. But it still took about a year.
Yeah.
We had to go through a lot of vetting to make sure they were making the product that we wanted, understand what the capabilities were, do a complete study on the content of product that was made in Indonesia versus components that came from China, to make sure we had a product that was actually, could be said, made in Indonesia, which we do.
Mm-hmm.
The product has to be, the factory is actually standalone on themselves, an Indonesian company, even though they have a partner in China. So that was, and actually both of those factories will have the same type of model. The other thing is that they have brought in, and they're doing particular sets of different types of manufacturing capabilities, and have extra land and capabilities to do more of that. As I talked about, you need to have components, and certain components in the electric. They actually have brought in partners that want to develop in Indonesia, that on their property they can actually come in and make a component there, and then they supply the factory. And if they want, they can supply others too. So that's a way to try to mitigate some of the issue of having to go to other countries to get components.
That makes sense. And Bill, overall, we got a good scale on the company. How many total SKUs are you guys offering?
About 200.
Got it. Okay, that's great to get a good feel for the company. And then how many SKUs do you launch per year on average, maybe like the last couple of years?
Well, it really depends, because we can take a particular type of product and then we can change the whole aspect if we make it a licensed product.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say on average, we have something around 30 a year that is changes or new that comes out.
Yeah. I mean, that's still a lot though, because the reason I ask that is, it's just, I like to ask questions that I'm curious about the answers on, but I'm thinking of your marketing department's got to launch 30 SKUs. They still got to shoot. You still got to, whether you outsource it or not, you got to shoot photos and, maybe do videos and do content, and you still got to bring 30 products to life, whether it's, you're just making slight changes or it's a new tool and a totally new design.
Right. I think it's really funny you mentioned that, because internally internally we get in discussions and somebody says, well, it's just another photo. It's just a different photo. It's just a different, no, but it's totally a different new product. And that's what people don't recognize sometimes.
Yeah.
You still have to go through the entire process. If you're just changing the outlook or you're changing the brand, it's a new product. Whether or not it's totally new or not, it's still a new product.
Yeah. And then, sales has to get it listed. And if you're putting it online, it's not accepted at the same rate at all the retailers. Some of them take forever. And I mean, it's interesting. And even with SKU rationalization, when people say, well, we're going to get rid of our poor sellers and bring in the new ones. I mean, it's a lot of work just to get these things listed and placed in the right areas online or in store. And it's hard to yank them, when you've done all this work and then they're just, bringing in revenue at that point. I don't know if you guys have to make the same decisions on your end.
Yeah, the thing that I think exasperates that whole situation is that retail in general is shrinking. The number of retailers that we have to sell is less. It's a good thing we do have the capability of using e-commerce and direct-to-consumer sales today, because that's opening up a whole new area for us to be able to address new product development that may not be accepted readily because of the limited retail capability today. It gives you a way to get to the consumer and to bring a new concept out that maybe retail isn't interested in attaching themselves to start with. So it's been a real opportunity to be able to try to look at the direct-to-consumer model, but not every product is made for that either.
Yeah, exactly. There's size and shipping considerations. Before we get you finally back to how you actually started this business, are you able to, we're talking a lot about supply chain and your business. Just curious if you're able to share what ERP or business system you're on. I know it's always another, just for our audience, an interesting one to think about.
And we use NetSuite. We went to that a little over a year ago. We're happy with it so far. We've added a couple of little modules to it. One of them is Source Day, which is a module that we add that gives really logistics handling with each factory. We have so many factories we work with. It's kind of a scheduling process that's all online. So it's a cooperation between them and us, and it manages that function of the business real well.
Awesome. And we use NetSuite too. So that's, and almost on your timeline. I think we've been on it about a year and a half.
Yeah.
But pretty close to you guys. What WMS did you guys land on? We've used a couple.
I'm sorry.
The warehouse management system. Did you guys?
We actually are using what we have with, can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll get it in the show notes for the audience. Well, you can email me later and we can get it in there.
Okay.
But yeah, it's interesting, Bill, just because your business and my business, they are similar in a sense, actually. Like, of course we're doing different products, but you guys are more in store, we're more online, but we're still probably using NetSuite in a lot of the same ways, and our supply chains are probably similar. And, we still do a lot of e-commerce business and some DI. So it's, NetSuite, it's a good solution, and it's becoming, it's definitely an industry leader out there, and it's all in the cloud. So it definitely saved you during COVID, right? I don't know if you guys went from,
that's correct.
If you went from a server system to a cloud, I don't know if you had a cloud-based system prior to NetSuite, but it's nice.
No, we did not. So it really helped.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Timing. Well, listen, let's get into just really quickly back to your kind of personal story here. So you're working for Rival, for 22 years, and then all of it's, and had a high position there. You're on a board of directors, and then decided to start your own company. Just kind of take us through, the process, your mindset, and then how you funded Select Brands.
Right. It is an interesting story that after 22 years of Rival, we had gone through 7 different acquisitions of companies during that time, and we were a domestic-based manufacturer at Rival. But it was clear to us as a management team that we could see this is not going to work for us if we don't look at least to the Far East, because their cost of operation was so much lower than the cost of operating factories in the United States. And not just labor, but a lot of different areas. And we started at Rival to look overseas, to develop a relationship overseas. I was fortunate enough to be part of that team that went to China and started working with factories and learning that process back in 1986. And my eyes were wide open, and it was a new country, a new culture, different manufacturing processes and operations. And I just was enamored with it, and I could see that I felt that the future, at least for the time being, with our product category, was going to be in China. And that's really the impetus that I took from that. But I also learned at the same time that if you just went overseas and bought something off the shelf, it wasn't really what the consumer was looking for over here. So I tried to take what I learned at Rival and understand a little bit more about the consumer, the marketplace, trends that were happening in our small appliance businesses, and then say, why doesn't someone put together a team that does the work of identifying the product, identifying the spec, identifying the style, the design, and then go to China and have China work with them to develop a product that makes sense for our country, and then own it so nobody else can buy it, and get the listing yourself so you have control over it, and then start to develop a brand that can drive that in the United States. So that was kind of the thought process behind going overseas and developing this. My problem to start with is I didn't have many brands, so I looked at licensing. And initially, some of the first licenses I had were Corning. And Corning, I was able to develop that brand into small appliances. I had Fiesta, which was the dinnerware that had kind of an iconic look to it and color. And then I had Campbell's, a Campbell soup company that can openers fit, maybe a slow cooker fit, maybe a hot pot fit. But you tried to take those brands that you could license that had a relationship of a product that could be developed that kind of the consumer could see, oh yeah, I can see that in this brand. And that's the way we started. Walmart was our biggest customer to start with. I had a very strong relationship there, and we had developed a private label product for them. It was during the time that George Foreman was just taking off, and we did a private label grill for Walmart, and that's what really started and made our business.
Well, that's a heck of a customer to start with. So
right,
it's when you start, and then how about funding the business? Was that just all bootstrapped? I mean, listen, these aren't the cheapest companies to fund because you've got inventory, obviously, right, and terms that in Walmart and other big retailers they're not always going to have favorable payment terms. So how did you handle that?
Well, two things were there. When I decided to do this, I got calls from several people that wanted to find out what I was doing and what I was going to do. And I took every penny I had savings and I actually invested that as well. But I got a call from a guy named David Friedson who used to own Windmere, which eventually ended up buying Black & Decker and ended up being sold to Spectrum Brands over time. But David knew me and knew the kind of person I was. And he said, whatever you're going to do, I'd like to be a part of it. And I said, well, what were you thinking? He said, well, why don't you put your notes together and think about that and come down and talk to me. And they were in Miami at the time. And I said, all right, I would. And so we set up a time, and I had a list of things that I wanted if I was going to have a partnership with someone that I needed. And one of them was distribution. And that was probably the biggest one. And a back room, if you would, to give me some accounting processes and things like that I could use initially as I was just starting up. So when I went and talked to David, the first thing out of his mouth is he didn't ask me. He kind of told me what he had in mind. And if I went down my list, he actually talked about everything on my list, and we just checked them off together. And at the end of the day, he said, I said, how much of the business do you want? And he said, I want 51%. And I said, no, I won't do it. So we ended up starting off being 50-50 partners. And I told him I would end up developing product for him and help him out in the Windmere side too. And that's the way we started out. And I had a back room, I had accounting function behind me, and then I did sales and marketing and product development all in Kansas City. And that's the way it started. It didn't last long. It lasted about 2.5 years, because David, he first of all asked me to become president of Windmere. And I said, well, what about when I'm starting? He said, he said, you can continue to do that. I just need help here. So I was developing select brands and at the same time operating Windmere. And then David ended up buying Black & Decker. As soon as Black & Decker was bought, everything changed. And eventually I went back to David and said, hey, I don't like the way this is going, and everything I'm trying to develop is being kind of undermined by what we're doing with Black & Decker. And he said, well, what do you have in mind? I said, I'd just like to buy my 50% back. And I said, either I buy my 50% back or you buy my 50%, but I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to develop my own. So 24 hours later, he agreed to let me buy the 50%. I did. And that was Select Brands from there going forward, totally mine.
Wow, what a story. And fortuitous and fortunate. You had the funding at the right time and honestly started the business in a great time. Like you're talking about, that was kind of just when China was still opening and not everybody was, even if you just knew how to buy a product from China, you could make money back then.
That's correct.
That's totally correct. Different. So how did you guys settle on a that price? Was there some easy math to do where it was easy to figure out how to buy out that 50%?
Yeah, it was pretty easy. The money that he had put into the business from inventory, etc. That's basically what the value ended up being. We split the profit that was made up to that point, and we had grown the business pretty fast in those 2 years. Mm-hmm. Basically, went from a startup that we did about the first year did about $5 million to about $12 million within 2 years.
Oh wow,
and
that's a big one.
It just generated big after that. And that was basically because of the private label programs that we're able to set up.
Yeah, wow. And why don't we talk about, the licensing side of things? Mm-hmm. We've done a couple of deals, and I know, again, I always like to think of what's going to be interesting for the business owners and in the audience here. And folks that haven't worked with licensing, it can be a huge multiplier, but it's also can constrain you a lot with the way that the terms are written in the contracts. I guess, the question here is, how do you successfully manage the whole licensing process? So where have you found the win-win? I'm guessing with great names. And then how have you negotiated those contracts in a favorable way that still is a win-win and isn't just, put you in a reporting rut where you have to report every single number and hit minimums that are unattainable and so on and so forth. I'd be curious to hear just maybe some words of wisdom on the licensing side.
Well, look, I can tell by just your comments there that you've experienced the contracts. I think you know that there can be some real pitfalls in those as well.
Yep.
And I think the best thing that we did was by starting off right out the very first step, we ended up having 3 different companies that we did contract deals with. Each one of those contracts were different. Some of them were pretty arduous. As you can see today, we don't have any one of those companies that are part of an ongoing licensing agreement. But we learned a lot during that time. And one of them are the guarantees, the minimums that you have to make. I think the biggest thing is finding a brand that relates to what you are doing. It's not just putting a name on a product. It's having a name go on a product that people can recognize as both what the value and the utility value is and what enhancement or what prestige that brand brings to that product. And then, depending on the type of business you're in, the royalty rates have a big play. And you can see we'd actually did early on some NFL properties. This was at Rival, and I kind of learned a little bit there.
Okay.
But their royalty rate was completely, almost unattainable to be able to put the limitations that they had in the royalty program that they had was really high for a small appliance that you're not making that kind of margin structure on. So when you added their royalty costs, their guarantee costs, their marketing costs onto your profit, onto your normal margin, all of a sudden your product became not competitive in the marketplace. So we learned a little bit from that and how we negotiated the contracts were to let people know, yes, we can pay a premium, but we can't make it so high that people won't buy it, or I can't get your guaranteed amount. I also think that one of the things we learned in licensing was you needed to be able to, if you started a business and it started to create some good volume, you wanted to make sure there was a stipulation that if you met certain hurdle rates, that you had a guarantee that those licenses would continue. And that's one thing we tried to put into place as well. And then we have been very fortunate to have Disney. Disney's been a huge, successful license for us. And then we have all the Disney brands, including Lucas and Pixar. We have all those. And then funny that once you get one and you do well with it, other people in that business come to you and all the time try to talk you into working with them. And that sometimes helps you negotiate favorable terms in the contract. I'm also very fortunate that Eric, my oldest son, is very detail-oriented, and he handles that part of the business from a standpoint of contract negotiations, understanding the marketing and working with the marketing people on the development of the product, and the relationship managers with Disney in particular.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Taking us through the whole story in licensing. And again, it's worth a rewind there for anybody interested in getting into the business or in a current contract. But I have seen, kind of like what you talked about with that initial story with Rival and I think the NFL, and you didn't mention numbers, of course, but I have seen licensing percentage in royalty fees come down over the years, now, often below 5%, but, years ago, above 10% in a lot of cases with some brands.
12 to 15%.
Yeah, there you go. So you're right. It can just price you out. And for a lot of hard goods, there isn't enough margin there at the end after all the different allowances and everything that else that comes in from the retail channel. So yeah. And my 2 cents though, is just having a really great, I think you hit on the same thing, but having having a great name that's going to resonate with the product category you're going into is an obvious one, but it's the most important. And of course, Disney is, there aren't many names better than that. And I've been to there's a licensing show every year in Vegas, and they might have it elsewhere. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. You walk around, you just see, all these incredible names you'd love to be affiliated with, but then you also see older brands trying to get their name into every category. And in a lot of those cases, it didn't resonate with me. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your product kind of defines those areas that you can have a success with license.
Yep. Well said. Why don't we move on to the family dynamic? I know that's an interesting one. Growing up, I worked at my dad's donut shop. I probably have told this story once or twice on the podcast, but I was like 10 years old making donuts in the middle of the night graveyard. And that's how I learned to work hard. But it was, family business, and we all had to work together. It's a small business. At one time, he owned a couple donut shops, but mainly out of one donut shop. Donut shop is still around, by the way. He sold it. So if anybody's in Huntington Beach, check out the Donuttery on Beach and Slater. It's literally kind of famous over there now. But
that's great.
That's my family story on business. Talk about your dynamics. You have two sons working with you. When did they start? How long have they been with the business? And would love to hear some stories on that.
Well, that's great. And actually, I'll tell you a little bit about my roots too. My father was a salesman. He worked for Rival.
Oh, wow.
And before I went with Rival, he worked there for years. And he introduced the crockpot. So that was a big thing.
Yeah.
He was so proud of that because unlike most products, crockpots start in the Midwest and resonated out to the coast.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually had the biggest territory in all of Rival at the time because he really got behind the crockpot and started that. So anyway, I learned from him. I learned a lot from him. And I think that I'm fortunate that both of my sons decided to join Select Brand. Eric, both sons have graduated from Baylor University. And Eric had gotten out, that's my oldest son, he got out first. And he went to work for Libby Glass in Dallas for a little while. And when I started Select Brands, I said, I don't know, what your career path or what you want to do is. I said, but if you like the housewares business, I said, I'm starting this thing called Select Brands, and if you'd like to join me, I'd love to have you be a part of it. And he said, well, let me think about it. And he decided to do it. And I was so happy with that because Eric is he studied marketing in school, and he understood a little bit more about today's business and today's business cycles, I think, than maybe I did, even though I kept up with him. But he brought a whole different perspective into the game. He's very detail-oriented and has a good head for recognizing trends. And Eric started off in the marketing area and working with product development and then into the licensing side of it. He's now the vice president of marketing here and works on product development, on the licensing programs, on the e-commerce side, relationships and things that go on there as well. Wes, my other son, is, I would say he's a consummate salesman, but he also is very creative and artistic minded. He does all of our branding, all of our packaging, all the photo work for our product, and also works some in the sales area. He has a team of 3 people that work on developing the artwork and our branding. And that in itself is a lot of work because of the number of products that we come out with all the time. So there's a good mix on both sides, and that's been a blessing to us, really.
Yeah. And how is it at the family gatherings? You guys talking business, at Thanksgiving, trends, where you guys want to go with things? I assume it's got to come up in the family conversations.
Well, I will tell you, Luke, one of the things that I decided early on is I did not want to have the business be the only thing that our lives revolved around. So when both sons started, one of the things we did, we sat down and we said, we set up a rule that when we have a family gathering, we don't talk about business. And I will tell you that every once in a while, something will creep in there that might be important at the time, but we choose not to speak about what's going on our daily business. When we have family gatherings, we can concentrate on our family.
That's smart because it can overtake everything, right? And
yes,
you can spend the whole gathering just talking business up in the corner. So
right, we have grandkids we need to focus on and kids that we need to focus on. So that's the thing we try to do as a family.
Eric, it sounds like he had a job before he joined Select. And how about Wes? Did he join right away, or what was his path to the company?
Yes, he actually, and he went for a little bit, went on a mission after he graduated from college. He went on a mission trip and was working at a church for a little while. And then I talked to him to coming into work at Select Brands. So he's been with us since graduation. let's see, Eric is 42 and Wes is 40, so they've been here a while.
Oh, wow.
Eric's been here since the very beginning, and Wes shortly after.
Oh, wow. Okay, so Eric has been there from wow, that's cool. It can be a lot of pressure on the kids. It can be both ways. From the outside, I think, people or other employees can look at it one way, but honestly, for the family, it's like double the pressure, because the kids really have to stand out and have to bring the extra work ethic. So I bet there's, early on, there's probably some challenges and some pressure, but it sounds like you guys have navigated that.
Yeah, I'm proud of the fact that they have been able to live up to what I think is a good company reputation and good work ethic too.
Yeah. Well, listen, Bill, I really enjoyed just diving into all these different areas, and I know the audience is going to, get a lot of interesting insights here. Why don't we finish with, just more about, maybe a big takeaway from you. So kind of the question that I pose here is that you've been on, various boards of directors, you've held leadership roles, in your own business and have been doing that for 22 years. So what are the kind of the common mistakes you see other business owners making, and, maybe from an area of improvement that others can look at?
Well, I think one of the things is just reflecting on what you are and not trying to be everything to everyone. If you try to answer everything in every business question and every different channel of distribution and every customer, I don't think you'll be successful. Focus on what you can do best and then build on that. That's been, I think, a strength that we have. We don't sell every retailer, and that's by design, because we want to be important to those that we do sell. I tried a lot, and this is trial and error, but we tried other categories of goods and tried to expand into other categories, but we found we kept coming back to what our roots were, and that was a small appliance business. And that's where we concentrate totally today, because we found that's what we do best, and that's what we can have the biggest impact on with our customer base.
Great advice. And you can say it a lot of different ways, but the key theme there is to focus. So great way to finish the conversation today. And Bill, how can listeners, connect with you or find more about you?
Well, www.selectbrands.com is one way. And then we have a phone number if you want to call. We'll talk to you. It's 913-663-4500.
Awesome. Great business story and family story. And so for the audience, we'll have all of this in the show notes, and hopefully you guys check out Select Brands and learn more about Bill's story here. And thanks again for listening to this episode of the Page One Podcast, sponsored by Retail Band. Hope you all enjoyed the interview today and truly appreciate your reviews on iTunes, and hope you join us for the next interview.
Thanks for listening to the Page One Podcast with Luke Peters. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us out by leaving us a rating on iTunes. Want to double your online sales? Check out www.retailband.com. And don't forget to join us next week with our next amazing guest.